Did you know that the hit series Fooly Cooly Grunge had a prequel? It's pretty good and you should try watching it sometime. I have very, very vivid memories of watching Fooly Cooly Episode 1 for the first time and being blown away specifically by the stop-motion ending sequence. It fits in perfectly with everything that came before, but at the same time, I just wasn't expecting it to suddenly do that. And I know it had an impact on other people as well, because the ending of Fooly Cooly Alternative is clearly trying to create something similar. Across all the dozens and dozens of times that I've watched Fooly Cooly, I have never once skipped these credits, and I have always watched them from beginning to end. And every time I do, I get the same nagging question at the back of my mind. Where was all of this filmed? As a young man, I dismissed the possibility of ever answering this question. But as a grown woman who's tracked down all the filming locations from Madame Web, the answer suddenly feels like it's within my grasp. Before we begin, we know definitively exactly one of these locations. The bridge that the Vespa ends its journey under is the Mitaka Overpass. This bridge was built almost 100 years ago, and it's got a lot of history associated with it. It was a favourite spot of the novelist Osamu Dazai. It's a pretty popular location with train and railway enthusiasts, and the fact it is so recognisable means that a lot of Fooly Cooly fans have been able to track it down and take photos under it. So, since the Mitaka Overpass is the end of the Vespa's journey, I think, this'll actually be quite simple. We know where the journey ends, we have a recording of the journey, so we just need to retrace the steps the Vespa made backwards, and we'll figure out where it started. And I was very, very wrong. Watching the Fooly Cooly credits back one frame at a time reveals that the Vespa is not going on a single unbroken journey. It's appearing and disappearing all over the place. A good example is here, where the Vespa turns a corner into what looks like a suburban street for a couple of frames, but then suddenly it's moving alongside a river. This isn't a case of the Vespa skipping a couple of blocks, it's literally just moved to a completely different place. This means that our plan to track the Vespa's journey backwards from the Mitaka Overpass to the place it started isn't going to work. If we look closely at the ending sequence, we can see that the Vespa is taking 3 reasonably consistent routes through 3 reasonably consistent locations. We've already kind of identified one of them, which is the couple of streets leading up to the Mitaka Overpass. We'll call that Route 3 because it's the third one that we see. The very start of the ending sequence we'll call Route 1. It's situated in a city, and it features the Vespa moving through what looks like a university campus or some other kind of large public complex. In between the two of them is Route 2, where the Vespa follows some small roads and paths that run alongside a riverbank. There's also these 3 isolated shots that aren't really given any context. There's a brief visit to a basketball court, there's a road with some trees in the background where the Vespa spins for a little bit, and then there's the Vespa driving off along a riverbank, which I assume is the river from Route 2. We're going to start with Route 3 because figuring it out is honestly pretty trivial. We know where we are at the end, so we just play the Vespa's journey in reverse from the Mitaka Overpass and copy the motions. Seeing this area for the first time after having seen it probably 50 or 60 times in a stop-motion anime closing was honestly kind of surreal. This place is called Horrorway Street, and despite Fooly Cooly being filmed 25 years ago, this area hasn't really changed. It feels kind of like I'm moving around inside a VR recreation of the ending sequence. The layout of the area means there's really only one way we can actually go, so we follow Horrorway Street around the corner and wind up at the beginning of Route 3, overlooking the same silhouettes of the same buildings that we see in the first frame of the route. That was pretty painless. So we now have Route 3 mapped already, and we can say definitively that it was filmed in Mitaka. It begins near the intersection of Sakuradori Avenue and Route 121, moves toward an intersection, moves south for 1 block, turns west into Horrorway Street, and then terminates under the Mitaka Overpass. Now, I mentioned that this area hadn't really changed. That's only as far as these Street View photos from 2024 are concerned, though, because currently the Mitaka overpass is in the process of being demolished. You can even see on these Street View photos that it's already been blocked off to pedestrians. So if you were hoping to go by and snap a photo yourself one day, it's unfortunately too late. This does mean, though, that the Fooly Cooly credits are a form of historical preservation, though, which is pretty cool. So great, we're 1/3 of the way through already. Except we're not really, are we? Because Route 3 was a single unbroken journey where we already knew the destination. Not only do the other two routes routinely skip around, but we don't have anywhere as easily identifiable or well documented as the Mitaka overpass to use as a landmark. We know that the ending was filmed somewhere near Production IG's offices, which are located in Musashino. Musashino's not that far from Mitaka, so we can kind of assume the other locations are somewhere relatively nearby. There's a very old Reddit post that informs me part of the ending was filmed at these coordinates, but when I put them into Street View and check them, it doesn't show me anything recognizable, and it's in Kanagawa. The attached link is dead and was never archived, so I have no idea what the context of these coordinates is supposed to be, and literally every other reference to the ending I can find just shows the Mitaka overpass. I have very, very little to go on. So let's start by trying to figure out Route 1. There's some city streets that don't have any real landmarks, and the combination of the lens distortion and the low resolution of the photos used makes reading the signs impossible. What I'm focusing on here is this part where the Vespa moves through this complex of buildings. It's a large area that appears to be open to the public but doesn't have traffic running through it. So I'm assuming it's something like a university campus or some other public facility. There's also this very distinctive walkway and stairs that, if we know roughly where we're looking, we might be able to find on the Google Maps satellite image. We can also see a sign to the left of frame as the Vespa exits the complex. It's too blurry to read, but it does at least give us something to look for. A quick trip to Japanese Twitter reveals that a user called Shuchgu actually identified this place as the Musashino Sports Complex, and provides photos that match the ending sequence very, very closely. This is quite close to where Production IG's headquarters are, so it's safe to assume the rest of the sequence is also shot around this area. So we know where the Vespa was, but like I said, there's no traffic moving through this place, which means there's no street view, which means we can't just drop in and figure out what the actual route was. But we do have the sign that is glimpsed for a few frames as the Vespa is exiting the complex. So I move around the sides of the complex, checking all of the exits one by one, and here it is on the north side. We can see the sign, we can see the path the Vespa takes, we can see the building with the curved roof, and we can see this house that still looks pretty much identical 25 years later. So, like the Mitaka overpass, we have an ending and we can start working backwards. The Vespa takes a reasonably straight path through the complex, so I start by looking for this long, narrow ramp, and I find it pretty easily, which gives us a good idea of where the Vespa pops out. This also reveals that the building on the right during this sequence is actually the back of some stadium seats. We follow the Vespa backwards in a roughly straight line, and we find the ramp from the beginning and pop out right where the Vespa enters. Everything's going really, really well, so I start following the road back, and this doesn't match anymore. I watch the sequence back, and I realize that there is a very abrupt edit that I missed, and the Vespa has actually teleported from somewhere else. The biggest clue about the location the Vespa has moved from is that it's an intersection with this distinctively shaped building on one side and what looks like a petrol station on the other. By zooming the map of the area out, we can kind of get a rough idea of where the Vespa's path could have been, and we start looking for petrol stations because I figure that it's the most likely thing to still be there. none of the petrol stations match. I'm beginning to worry that this was filmed nowhere near the sports complex and I'm back to square one, but eventually I decide to brute force it and I just check every single intersection in the vicinity just in case, and after way too long on Street View, I eventually find the building, and it turns out it was the petrol station that got removed. So we're kind of back in business now. There is another sudden jump, but luckily the place it is jumping to is not that far away from where we started, and it's relatively easy to find by just going into the satellite view and looking for pedestrian crossings. The very distinctive roof on the building to the right of frame matches, and we finally know exactly where the Vespa went from this intersection to the Musashino Sports Complex. But we don't know how the Vespa got to the intersection in the first place. In comparison to what we just went through, this is a relatively painless process because it is a largely unbroken journey. Just like with the Mitaka overpass, we can pretty easily retrace our steps, so we see some very familiar buildings, and we wind up at the very, very beginning of the ending sequence, which turns out to be a street that is, predictably, literally right round the corner from where Production IG is. We put both halves together and we end up with a functional and complete Route 1. It starts in Bunker Kaikan Street, moves north to the intersection of Taisadori Avenue, turns east and moves up to the intersection of Seikadori Avenue, turns north again, moves up to Prefectural Route 7, teleports a couple of times, and then moves north through the Musashino Sports Complex. This only leaves Route 2. Route 2 can go to hell. Route 2 is the bank of a large river that is running through a city. Since Routes 1 and Route 3 are pretty close to each other, that should make it relatively simple. We just look at a map of the area, find a large river, and boom, we're done. There are no large rivers in this area. The only major river that is anywhere near the previous locations looks absolutely nothing like the place used in Route 2, which downgrades our knowledge of this location to it's somewhere. But it turns out I am not the only person who has wondered where this river is. A Japanese blogger called Ganmen made a point of looking for it in late 2023. Ganmen notes that the Vespa passes under 3 bridges, and these are in order: a train bridge, a car bridge, and then a train bridge again. Ganmen also notes that there is a transmission tower, and this ends up being a really big help to us because there's an entire community of otaku who obsess over transmission towers and have made an interactive map of Japan that shows the location of every single one of them. Ganmen goes onto this map and looks for rivers that have 2 rail bridges either side of a car bridge and are near a transmission tower. And he finds it. It's the Tsurumi River in Kanagawa, which is absolutely nowhere near where the other 2 routes were. You know what it is near, though? It's near the GPS coordinates that I got from Reddit and didn't understand. They are the GPS coordinates of one of the bridges that the Vespa goes under, just not the river itself. So I understand now, I think, and I apologize for dismissing these earlier. So thanks to Ganmen and the transmission tower enthusiasts of Japan, we have a starting location for Route 2. It's under this bridge by the Tsurumi River in Kanagawa. There's no street view available for the bank of the Tsurumi River, but we can follow it from the satellite view without too many problems because it's entirely outdoors. So, tracing the Vespa's path, we go under the bridges, and then there's another fucking edit. And I don't know where we are anymore. Now, we're not going to get too frustrated just yet because we know that there is a bridge that goes over the Tsurumi River. So we just need to go on satellite view and find a bridge over the Tsurumi River, and that will tell us where the Vespa ended up. That bridge isn't there anymore. What I do eventually find, though, is I find 2 paths that end at the riverbank but don't connect to each other, which suggests that there probably was a bridge here at some point. Lining up the nearest available street view gives us, yep, that's where the Vespa goes. So there was a bridge here, and it's since been removed. Crossing to the opposite bank reveals that we have even fewer options for street view, but there is a decent photosphere that shows us roughly where the Vespa's going. So we can follow this path along, and it's happened again. I don't know where we are. So welcome to location 3. We have a few clues about where this place could be. Namely, if we look at the skyline, we can see that there's these two very distinct buildings that are quite easy to find when we're on street view. And we know that the Vespa does a roughly 90-degree turn at one point before going under a bridge. So there are very few 90-degree bends in the Surumi River with a bridge near them. So we go looking for something that matches, and yep, there's our two distinct buildings. There's the vaguely brutalist one on the right of frame, and that means the bridge that the Vespa's going under at the end is this one, which is the Shin-Yokohama Bridge. So you'd think that's the end, we're done. We're not done. This section of the journey became completely and utterly baffling to me. The Vespa is definitely turning here, but the terrain that we see now and the terrain in the ending sequence are completely different. There is also no street view option for this area. But even using satellite images, we should be able to see some bridges and islands in this place that we can see in the ending, but there just aren't any. So I'm massively confused. I can't get a good look at the location because there's no street view data. The satellite photos don't match. I need to come up with an alternative. From what I've seen, the Surumi River seems like a pretty popular place for people to walk and cycle, so I wonder if someone's uploaded a video of themselves walking along the bank in this area. And to my rescue comes YouTube user Urban Hiking 2019. Urban Hiking 2019, the absolute Chad, has uploaded themselves walking the entire length of the Surumi River, and this gives us a much, much better view of the area, and it confirms that yes, this definitely is the spot the Vespa passed, and upon rounding the corner we find that the bridge and the islands are just not there anymore. Have they just completely remodeled this area sometime in the last 25 years? Yeah, they have. This area of the Surumi River that the Vespa travels across in the ending sequence is a basin that's designed to stop the river flooding, and subsequently it's been remodeled and sealed off. That's presumably why the bridges are gone and why these islands are no longer accessible from the bank. This might also explain why the bridge from earlier on has been removed. They could have been safety hazards related to the flooding. This whole situation also means that Urban Hiking 19 can't go the same way the Vespa goes, but we can see in the distance that is the same part of the Shin-Yokohama Bridge that the Vespa goes under at the end of Route 2. So we're done, except we're not, because there's another abrupt edit here, but it takes us somewhere that I will say is pretty much impossible to place because there are no landmarks other than what looks like a construction site, and I don't think a 25-year-old construction site is going to look the same. So the extremely simple Route 2 involves the Vespa starting on the bank of the Surumi River, going under some bridges, suddenly teleporting to another part of the Surumi River, crossing a bridge that doesn't exist anymore, teleporting again, and ending up in another area that doesn't exist anymore, before ending at a construction site that is in retrospect probably the reason none of those bridges exist anymore. So with that, we've got the entirety of routes 1, 2, and 3 mapped, and we're done, kind of. We still have the 3 isolated spots that are not shown to connect to any of the routes. These are the river, the trees, and the basketball court. The river is the easiest one. If we assume it's still the Surumi River and look around a place we are already kind of familiar with, We're looking for a relatively narrow pathway that leads into a bend from underneath the bridge. We can also see that there's these power lines in the distance that should be relatively simple to line up, which identifies this spot as underneath the Takanohitodo Bridge. This set of trees I am not even going to bother with. There are no landmarks, it's just some trees that are somewhere. For all we know, they are gone now. I'm sorry, but I also feel no shame in just saying this part can't be done. The basketball court is the most frustrating part of this project. We can tell some things about it. It is a very small urban or suburban park, and the fence to the left of frame has these very tall lights on poles on the other side of it, as if it's like a car park or an outdoor court or something. Something you would want lit at night. The park runs perpendicular to a road, and if we assume this was shot in the afternoon, the sun setting kinda suggests we're facing west. Armed with this information, I spent hours upon hours looking up every single park and every reference to basketball I could find in Mitaka and Musashino. And I could not find any images of this place. I looked up the car parks. I looked up the outdoor sports courts. I squinted and looked at every green rectangle that faced east-west. I found nothing. For all I know, in the intervening 25 years, this has become something else. This is genuinely incredibly frustrating, but unlike the trees, there is just enough to go off that suggests this place could be located. I just can't do it. This basketball court, if it still exists, is my white whale. So, with two very small exceptions, we finally have, 25 years later, a definitive map of where the Vespa goes at the end of Fooly Cooly. I hope that, like me, you found this interesting, and, unlike me, you didn't give yourself repetitive strain injury figuring it out. So before we call it a night, here is, side by side, the ending of Fooly Cooly and a map showing you exactly where the Vespa goes. I've been Sophie, RIP Fooly Cooly, RIP the Pillows, RIP Mitaka Overpass. From Hell's Heart, I stab at the basketball court.
So